when it comes to SST, there are a couple of things to think about there as well. And an SST, it's not, if the node, as I said, cannot do an IST, it will resort to SST. And if it has to do an SST, then you want it to succeed, basically, right? And you don't want to have any configuration mistakes, at least, causing it to fail. And if you are using the rsync methods, and now if you are experiencing problems with the rsync method, then it may be that you need to increase a timeout that is part of the VSREP SST rsync script. It's located on the actual Galera nodes, and this time is by default set to 300. But when an SST is in progress, the nodes need to scan basically the data directory to figure out what files and directories it has. And if it's a huge database, this scanning inspection of the file system to locate what are the directories and files that are there, it will take time. And during that time, if it takes longer than 300 seconds, the joining node will basically give up and say, I can't join the cluster if this timer kicks in. So then I think it's good to bump it up. But you will notice pretty fast when you're testing and evaluating if you're running into these problems. So usually you cover this, not during production, but you do it. You make sure that this is fixed in testing evaluation. If you're using extra backup, well, then extra backup will use the MySQL temp dir by default, and the extra backup, what it will use the temp dir for, is to store a transaction log basically during the backup. And if this temp dir is too small, well, then you may run out of space, and then the SST will fail as well, right? It will then fail on the donor, and no matter how many times you try, it will still be the same problem. And what I really recommend you to do is to make sure, first of all, that temp dir, by default, it points to /tmp for MySQL, or and to make sure that you have enough space on the partition where /tmp resides. And if you're, if the temp partition is, happens to be small, like, for example, a couple of 100 megabytes or whatever, then perhaps you should consider to move to set the temp dir to be on a bigger partition. And especially true if you're, for example, using also tempfs for the MySQL server, then it might not be the best to also have the extra backup use the tempfs for logging the transactions while it is streaming the backup to the other node. So yeah, I think don't forget to look at that at least. Another thing that we got a question about here, but what if we often get questions about is, what if the recovery would fail now? How do we handle a failed recovery? Well, one thing to start looking at is basically going from left to right. You have to start by looking at the donor, and you can look there on the donors in the MySQL log of the donor, and also in the InnoDB backup.log to see if there are any causes there that prevents the SST from completing. And there you would catch things like that you're running out of disk spacing, for example, in the temp dir partition. then you have to move. Then if there is no problem on the donor, then you have to look on the joiner, and you look also there on the MySQL error log and on the InnoDB prepare log there to find out if you have any particular problems. And problems there could be, for example, that there's tons of different problems really, but some quite common cases after a hard crash of a node is that the file system of that InnoDB will, of that MySQL server that crashed, will be corrupted. And the best case then to fix that, the best way to fix that then is actually to do an rm-rf/varlib/mysql star, and then remove all the contents basically in the MySQL data directory. And then when the node starts up again, it will do a full sync and will synchronize the data into a clean data directory. That usually works pretty well in case the SST would fail due to file system corruption. Okay, at this stage now we have pretty much covered up to, we have a good grip on the basics of Galera, about the requirements on the tables, that they should have primary keys and things like this. And we also know, a few things that we should, look at the operating system to have covered that area, and we also know a little bit about how to make sure that recovery is happening through an IST instead of an SST. So we have, I think, a pretty solid ground level at this point. But then, of course, you're loading in you're loading in data. You're changing your application. Data set grows. What was true 1 month ago is not true any longer, because you have had a tremendous growth, more users, and these are cases when you will start to notice if you have queries that are badly written or indexes that are missing. And those are things to really watch out for. So to, as early as possible, to detect these queries that are long running and slow, that basically ends up in the slow query log, and to tune them, because untuned queries, or if they're missing indexes and things like that, will take longer time to run, and they will then start to eat CPU and other resources, part of the database, and then there will be eventually contention, and the database will be forced to spend time just scanning data and returning only few records up to the application. So query tuning is something that we must do, and it's a continuous problem really, because it's always it's an iterative process. So you tune queries, then the next you tune a few queries, the top 5 queries, and then they'll be running fine, but then some other queries will be will need attention. New functionality comes in, there are more query tuning, more indexes to add, and it just goes on and on. You should also look out for DML. I've written DDL here, it's wrong, it should be DML, that are locking many records. So for example, if you have begin select star from T1 for update, if you use that construct over unbound queries again, then that's something that will lead to severe contention inside the Galera nodes, and will even if you run it just on one isolated node, it will affect the other nodes as well. we should also make sure that you're updating and deleting many records in chunks, as talked about a little bit in the 101 section. But just do things in smaller batches instead of updating all records at once. I've also seen that it's not uncommon to see deadlocks and deadlocks prone code. For example, you need to know, of course, what are causing the deadlock, what are the queries that are causing them. I have seen, for example, many cases where accidentally, two MySQL dumps have been launched at the same time. That can really cause big problems and really sink a Galera cluster. And when I mean sink a Galera cluster, I mean that the nodes will be disconnected from each other and basically become isolated, non-initialized or initialized non-primary components. But anyways, you can use, there are many tools that you can use to detect these problems. And by that, I want to hand over for a second to JJ again.
Yeah, thanks, Johan. Just on those tools, we just want to ask all of you who are participating today in this webinar, what tools do you currently use to help you detect, these types of errors that we've just been looking at? So it'd be great if you could let us know what you're using at the moment in your day-to-day work with your databases, just to give us a good idea. And I'll share the results, of course, of the poll once everyone had a chance to place their votes here. So whether it's Cacti or Zabbix or Monyog, MySQL Enterprise Monitor and Cluster Control, I'll just give it a few seconds. And if if a tool that you use isn't on this, then we do apologize, but we'll just take that into account. Or maybe you can let us know in the question section what tools you use if it's not listed here. That would be interesting to know as well. Great, thanks very much. I'm just going to close this poll and share the results. Yeah, so it's similar to the session we had this morning. So Johan, about half of the participants use Cacti and or Munin, and then about 36% use Cluster Control, and then it's Monyog and MySQL Enterprise Monitor. So it's evenly enough distributed, and I think it's kind of typical to see also a mix of tools being used, probably for different aspects of monitoring. Yeah, someone says they're using Nagios, for example. So with that, Johan, I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, different tools. Some of them give visibility into some problems, and some tools gives into visibility into other areas. And I think many of the tools can really coexist, and that's perfectly fine. So a situation that we really would like to avoid is when the performance really flatlines and nothing happens in the cluster. We were running here, a little bit of load, and then suddenly, nothing basically happens. And what is happening? What's going on? That's the things that we want to try and figure out. And perhaps you want to have an alarm saying that we have a long-running transaction here. So obviously this transaction is blocking it. In this case, the system. And we see that the Galera is queuing up. You see the queues are building up. The Galera nodes cannot consume the queues because it's totally locked up, right? And in this case, it's probably some severe deadlock somewhere, or someone has executed a flush tables with read log. And this is something that we can see here, actually, that we are waiting for a global read lock here, right?